Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum, Irini Mazisu, Pax Vobiscum. Peace be unto you. Welcome to 2 Samuel, chapter 13. There are 39 verses in this chapter. In verse 1, it says, regarding Tamar, Absalom's sister, she was very beautiful, not simply fair. Not saying she isn't attractive, but fair doesn't even do her justice. She's probably a perfect 10, not merely a 7 or 7.5. Okay, verse 2. Regarding Amnon, he was distressed, even to sickness. Versus vexed, so he was troubled, but he was distressed because of her and in his infatuation towards her. It seemed very difficult for Amnon to do anything to her, versus he thought it hard for him. Those are similar. In verse 4, describes Yonadab being very cunning, which can also mean wise, and that's what Sato also has that connotation. Verse 5, a significant difference here. It says here, what ails you? Okay, hold on, just made a mistake in my notes. Okay, verse 5, it says, what ails you? That's actually verse 4. Okay, I've got, my notes are very wrong. Verse 4, significant difference. What ails you that you are thus weak? Versus why you, being the king's son, lean from day to day. So why are you poor or weak? Similar, but can be mistaken as meaning something else. If you lean against something, that does not mean the same thing as being weak. Verse 9, we have an omission of a frying pan, so it's a specific kind of pan. Verse 12, we see this continuous difference of forcing a woman against her will, being called humble in the Septuagint. Verse 13, remove my reproach versus cause my shame to go. Verse 14, he prevailed versus being stronger. Means same result, just different rationale. Maybe not rationale, but different ways it was expressed that he prevailed over his strength versus just him being stronger. In any case, he was stronger. Verse 15, there's an omission for, it says here, for the last wickedness was greater than the first. So the sin of Amnon committing this sexual assault against her, the R word, was greater than his deceiving and lusting after her. That's my initial thought, but I was actually wrong in this. We'll see what it is in the next verses. Verse 16, there's an addition of no cause. Sending her away, this is the answer. Sending her away was worse than the act of forcing himself upon her. So it's that, I hate to put it this way, but like the walk of shame where everyone in the vicinity will see that she's leaving his quarters or his abode the way she is, the way she appears. Perhaps it's easier to know back then when a young maiden was deflowered. We can use another way to express that. Okay, verse 18, shut, the door was shut versus bolted. So I guess the assumption is that the servant that was guarding that house was essentially guarding the house, so she would not be allowed in. Verse 19, variegated, which means variety, different colors, so very similar to the Masoretic with diverse colors. We can see a difference in, again, 19, her hands on her head, both her hands on her head, not just one. And she was crying, not in a small interval, a short interval, but crying continually without ceasing, perhaps. Verse 20, we can see Absalom actually suggests, not really suggests, but orders Tamar the following very important instructions. It says here, be not careful to mention this matter. That doesn't make sense. It sounds like he's saying, make people know, because that's a negative, rather than say, be careful to mention this matter. I believe the not should be moved to before the mention. So be careful not to mention this matter. But because the way Hebrew is structured, we have the not before the actions. Such as the Ten Commandments, it actually says not and then murder, for example. Instead of do not murder, it says not murder. And then if we're going to translate this into our modern day, basically it is keep this on the hush-hush, keep this in the down low. Don't, it's kind of funny, I'm dressed like this saying, keep it on the down low, keep it in the DL. Basically, be careful not to mention this matter. That's as straightforward as I can put it. Versus the Masoretic saying, regard not this thing. So that is actually a pretty significant difference. I would even say a big difference, but let's just keep it at a significant difference. So he's actually telling her, Amnon telling Tamar, regard not this thing. Regard not this thing. Don't worry, don't care about it. It says, hold now thy peace. Okay, it says it in both, but regard not this thing. It sounds very unfeeling. Don't worry about it. Don't care about it. Don't give it attention. Is how it sounds. So that's a very different set of instructions that he's giving her there, or advice. And then it says how Tamar dwelt as a widow. So she appeared as a widow in the house of her brother Absalom. We will see as you read on what that entails, ashes and different garments. And then in the Masoretic, it says she remained desolate, so not as a widow. She was just alone. Verse 21 is a significant difference once again. There's an omission of, but he did not grieve the spirit of his son Amnon. So this is very important information being omitted. King David did not grieve the spirit of his son Amnon. Why? Because he loved him, for he was his firstborn. So we see the rationale behind David's actions. So David was angry. Yes, he heard about the news of Tamar being forced, and it was Amnon who did it. He knew the perpetrator, but he decided not to take action and correct him. He didn't grieve the spirit of his son Amnon. He let him get away with it, essentially. That's what happened, if we're going to be very honest about these events. We are not given these details in the Masoretic text, and it's quite sad, and makes David just look like, well, I don't want to say what, but doesn't make him sound like a responsible father. Let's put it that way. Verse 25. It says here, burdensome. Let us not be burdensome to you. Versus, lest we be chargeable to you, lest we be heavy. It's another way to put chargeable when I looked at the original Hebrew. Verse 27. He sent with him. So King David sent Amnon and all his sons. Versus, he let Amnon go. So in the Septuagint, King David is ordering his sons to go, versus just permitting them to go because they wanted to go. Another significant difference, we have another omission. It says, and Absalom made a banquet like the banquet of the king. So we can see how grand it was and why they would want to go. Maybe they were convinced to go, finding out that it's a banquet fit for a king, like the banquet of King David. Verse 28, it says here, be valiant, and the footnote in my hard copy reads, the Greek says, become sons of strength. So it's a little more poetic there. Verse 33, slight variation, says think, saying versus think. So one is saying out loud, one is thinking in their head. Verse 34, another omission. It says here, in the descent, and the watchman came and told the king and said, I have seen men by the way of Araunah, by the side of the mountain. So those are more details that we are given in the Septuagint that are not included in the Masoretic. Verse 35, are present versus come. Okay, let me pause here. Okay, so I had to pause to look up this word in the Greek, present, which is paremi, and it's actually Greek Strong's 3918, parimi. And it means multiple things. Let's look at what it means. To be by, to be at hand, to have arrived, to be present. So that can mean three different ways: coming, have arrived, or to be present. So it could be future, present, or past. So that's important. So this doesn't exactly mean present. It means they are on the way, because it does say, behold, the king's sons come. I mean, they are on the way. So I was wondering, is the Septuagint actually wrong? It isn't. It's just that the translator simply did not conjugate this properly, did not put in the correct connotation for the context of this verse. So I wanted to prove, was there a contradiction potentially in the Septuagint? And we just showed you no, there isn't. Verse 39, and King David ceased to go out after Absalom, for he was comforted concerning Amnon touching his death. Let's reword that. David stopped looking for Absalom. Why? Because he moved on after the death of Amnon. So he just stopped looking after him, because it says here that David mourned for Absalom continually because he fled, couldn't find him anymore. But he wanted to keep finding him. He wanted to search for him, but he ceased after he ceased looking for him because he was comforted concerning Amnon, relating to his death, to Amnon's death. In the Masoretic, it's worded this way: King David longed to go forth unto Absalom. Why? Because he was comforted concerning Amnon, seeing he was dead. That makes less sense, so let's try to reword this. So David wanted to find Absalom. Why did he want to find Absalom? Because he was comforted. Why was he comforted? Concerning Amnon. How did that happen? Because Amnon died. Was killed, I should say. So this implies, possibly, it sounds a little twisted, but David wanted Amnon dead. Otherwise, he wouldn't be comforted. Well, that doesn't make any sense to me. And it really doesn't. Why would he be happy that his son Amnon died? The Septuagint reveals he wasn't. He was not comforted that Amnon died. He was comforted because he knew Absalom was the one that killed Amnon. If that makes any sense. Because the situation where he did not act in the right way, correcting Amnon and helping Tamar find closure, perhaps, David just did not know what to do. He did not want to, again, as I mentioned, I should say, as the Septuagint mentions, he didn't want to grieve his son because he loved him, for he was his firstborn. So basically, his firstborn was murdered by Absalom. But then again, there was a dilemma, a moral dilemma, a in the family problem. And so, although it was a loss of his firstborn, the the big uh, family trauma was allowed to reach some kind of closure in the death of Amnon, in the killing of Amnon, and that was done by Absalom, who had every right to do that. I'm not saying murder is correct. I'm saying that he did this for the honor of his sister Tamar. So that's the only way I can make sense out of this verse. If you have other ideas, please comment below. But again, King David stopped going after Absalom, for he was comforted concerning Amnon, relating to his death. Although this kind of makes sense to me as well, that he longed to go forth to Absalom. So why would it say cease to go out after? Unless it was King David ceased, and then it would say to go out after Absalom. In any case, it says what it says, so I'm not going to insert any more interpretation. So that's all for this chapter. Thank you very much for your time. I'm going to try another greeting, or another farewell greeting anyway. Until next time, I bid you all Shalom Aleichem. Okay, I forgot what I was going to say. But it's, I was preparing it. I think it's Yevarechecha Adonai V'yishmerecha. And in Arabic, Assalamu alaikum. Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And in the Greek, Irini Mazisu. In Latin, Pax Vobiscum. In English, peace be unto you. May God bless you and be merciful to you. Until next time, I bid you all Maranatha.